everyone, and welcome to Secure AF, the podcast about all things cybersecurity. I'm your host, Teddy Underkoppler. Today, I am joined with co-host Donovan Farrow.
What up?
And our special guest today, Phillip Wylie.
Hello.
Phillip, if you wouldn't mind, just go ahead, tell everyone a little bit about yourself, and then a little bit about the topic that you're here to talk about today.
Sure. Thanks for having me. It's an honor to be joining you guys today. It was great meeting you all at SecCon last year. I had a lot of fun at that conference. I'm Phillip Wylie. So I've been working in offensive security for a little over 10 years, cybersecurity total 19 years. Before that, I was a sysadmin. I've also taught ethical hacking and pen testing at Dallas College, and which actually inspired a book, The Pen Tester Blueprint, Starting a Career as an Ethical Hacker. That's where that came from. It was actually even went from a class lecture to a conference talk to a book. So very passionate about mentoring and educating others. And so really to even before that, before the sysadmin work, I was an AutoCAD drafter. So I learned AutoCAD because I started a career as a professional wrestler, but got married and needed something more stable with insurance and all that good stuff. And so, and during that pro wrestling time, I actually wrestled a 750-pound black bear.
Shut up.
Yeah. Yep.
Who won?
Yeah.
The bear did, I guess, actually, because he didn't.
He survived.
I didn't pin him. Yeah, but he didn't take me down. It was interesting because the bear was good enough at wrestling that he would take his front legs and take people's legs out from under him. And so I actually got a picture of me wrestling the bear, and you can see where he's got his paw around my leg trying to take me down.
No,
but gosh. I saw from the failed attempts of the others to get down in like a wrestling stance or a lineman stance, so he couldn't get my legs. So yeah, it was one of the crazy things I did during my wrestling career.
That's awesome. That's a great story.
And so to get into the topic we're here to discuss is I wrote an article for US Cybersecurity magazine last year. They reached out to me about writing an article, and I had recently gave a presentation for API Secure, Alyssa Knight's API Security Conference. So I was trying to think of a topic, and the company I work for did external attack surface management. And I really saw how, a lot of times we think about API security, they think about testing it and that sort of thing, but sometimes people miss out on the discovery piece of it. Do they know what's exposed externally? So that's where I got the idea for this topic, because, there's not only APIs that are exposed, there's other protocols out there as well. But the thing with APIs, some APIs need to be exposed to the internet, and some of them are just for internal use. And sometimes, just like RDP may be open to the internet, sometimes APIs are that shouldn't be. And if they're exposed, they need to be, configured where they're not exposed to the internet or secured. So if they are exposed to the internet, that they'll be secure.
Yeah, no, that's well said. I would even kind of start, if you don't mind, can you please explain the audience that way? We can start from the beginning, not too in the weeds, because we can definitely get there. But what is an API? How does that work? And we kind of talked earlier about how we're 6 years ahead of where we should be in advancement, but probably 8 years behind in security. So for the world, I think they don't understand what API does and how that is for the internet. Can you kind of break that down for the audience?
Sure. The acronym API stands for Application Programming Interface, which, today we're talking about web APIs, because it's generically people refer to as APIs, and there's other APIs like Microsoft Windows uses APIs for its programming and different functions. But web API is what we're talking about here. When you hear people talk about APIs, that's more commonly what they're referring to. APIs have been a great resource in technology because years ago, back like in the late 90s, early 2000s, we used middleware servers like Microsoft BizWorks to be able to communicate between different platforms. Maybe you had an AS400 or mainframe, you needed to communicate back and forth, different platforms. But web APIs have made it to where someone writes an application, you use those APIs to integrate with a mobile application interface, a web interface. It just really prevents the coders from having to rewrite a bunch of different code and stuff. It helps with the interactivity. It's used for IoT, OT environments, used to connect connect to and communicate. And as I mentioned, it just makes it easier. If you're writing an application, you're able to use it as a web app as well as a mobile application.
Well, I just like how you said Microsoft BizWorks. He just totally dated himself. So I appreciate I'm not the only one who knows what that is. That's great. What a terrible service that was, by the way. But to kind of what you said there, it's for everything. I don't think people realize that. Even when people, they say they want a web app test, you're like, okay. And then they're not even even asking for API testing, because I don't think the world's aware that the mobile device you just said, it's running on APIs. I don't know if people realize that. The world has totally changed, and I feel like it just kind of snuck up on everybody. And I feel like it even took maybe even us in the industry by surprise. Because again, I'm not a coder. I do just not a coder. I do a lot of breaking all that cool stuff for pen testing, but I'm not a coder, so I wouldn't be educated or understand the traffic flow from that philosophy. So very different world.
Yeah, it sounds like it's a whole brand new technology that, kind of speaking to your topic, is going to have to learn. People are going to have to learn how to actually secure it going forward.
What's happened is it's like anything else. Technology comes out and people think about security after the fact. That's even like you look at pacemakers and insulin pumps. A lot of those didn't have security on them because no one thought anyone would be nefarious enough to attack someone's medical device, but they do. And, the industry that's making the technology, product companies, they don't think about security, but I think we're starting to get better. I think they're starting to get better with that. And another thing you have to consider too with APIs is all the car connectivity. Recently there was an API discovery by a researcher that the APIs were affecting Tesla, all these other different vehicles, these APIs that you could go in and actually hack the vehicles because of these APIs. I'm trying to think of the guy, Sam Curry, I believe, was one of the researchers that discovered that they were able to gain access to all these different vehicles. And before, connected cars and all that, you really didn't worry so much, but now all of a sudden you're able to attack it with an API. So this just really brings about the seriousness of API security and how serious we need to take it.
Yeah, and I feel like the whole conversation of security first instead of an afterthought is a whole separate conversation. But it's very critical and something that needs to be discussed, and especially with some of these things like the cars that you don't think about, being able to be exploited or being vulnerable, but they absolutely are.
Yeah, and what you need to do to protect your vehicle from API takeovers, you get like the little, and where it connects to your satellites and your updates, you get a little tinfoil hat and you put on top of it. That way, you're blocked from all the hacking and radio taking over for your cars. A little tinfoil hat on it. There's no connectivity, no GPS, but you know what? You can use that for your phone. Mm-hmm. there's your firewall for a car right there. I just want to put a patent out there right now for that.
Yeah, that's a good idea.
The exposure's crazy. And I would like to think someone was asking me, well, Donovan, in security, and Phillip, you can speak to this as well. Like, how come you guys are supposed to be protecting? Why aren't you guys out in front of it? And I'm usually like, well, that's a good question. Well, again, technology comes and goes, and sometimes it just doesn't work out. So it never gets to the point where people are getting a third party for the assessment. It's a code base, and they keep it protected until it scales out. Just the technology now, it's big enough to where they're needing that and they're asking for it. It's just an intelligence thing on what's actually going to be the next big technology, and that's why companies are trying to make money from it as opposed to secure it. They're trying to make stuff work so they can make money as opposed to do the security thing. And it always is and always will. Security will always be last. They got to make the news first, and then that's for marketing. Something else got broken into, and then we're like, oh, we can do a pen test on that. And that's sad, but that's just the world we live in, because I'd say that humanity is a creator, not so much a what is this going to impact. I don't think we think about that too much. So
yeah, and you really have to think about it. And one of the things I've learned from pen testing for so many years is, like, once you kind of get familiar with this stuff, it's hard to look at things the same way. If you're at an airport somewhere, you see a USB thumb drive or flash drive laying on the ground, what do you think? If you worked in security, you think there's something malicious on it. But the average person is so trusting. That's why people are so easily social engineered and stuff. And so a lot of times people that are developers or creating products don't even think about, what the bad guys could do with that. And if anyone that's worked in IT, I mean, going back to IT, my IT days, is, you remember when any kind of application was going in, management was so gung-ho to get it in place, no one cared about the security. You did not perform, no one knew about pen testing really back then. It was around, but people weren't using it. So these applications weren't being pen tested beforehand. There was no kind of vulnerability scans. It just went into place. And that's because management was trying to get it in there. And so many cases, this is why all the programming issues came about. The developers are under pressure to get this out, and they get it out and it's not put in, in a secure manner.
Yeah. And again, just I'll add a little piece to that. Even back then, and with my career in IT, a new application, just to piggyback off what you just said, I don't know, for some reason it's getting blocked by the firewall. Okay, well, let's just any at the top. Hey, it's working now. And your firewall has any and all traffic coming in and out, and everything's working perfect. Applications running, people are making business. Also, the internet's remoting into your environment, but everything is working though. So,
Yep.
Yeah, sometimes it's so much about the money and it getting out there that people don't really worry about the security piece, and the money it can cost you from being breached. It's money lost there if you think about it.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So if you want to, can you go into now we kind of have that defined, and hopefully started shaking people and shaking the leaves and say how kind of terrifying this is, in a sense it really is. Can you start stepping into the thing that you wrote, kind of what that's
Sure.
about, and kind of going through? I'd love to hear that.
Yeah, because the approach I took from this was, the fact that, APIs are something that need to be secured, but are we, the awareness of what we have exposed to the internet. Some APIs are for external use only, and just like sometimes RDP gets exposed to the internet or other protocols that shouldn't be, APIs are the same way. And sometimes people think APIs should all be exposed to the internet, but that's not the case. There may be. And then for the APIs that are externally exposed, you want to make sure those are secure. And you also want to make sure that you have a good inventory of all those, because one of the things that's happened in the industry is, you figure how difficult it can be keeping up with an inventory internally, but it's more critical when it's external. When you've got things exposed externally, you need to make sure you have those, because if you don't know what you have out there, you can't, protect it, you can't secure it, you can't test it to see if it's secure. And so that's really what this article really entails, the external attack surface management piece, because a lot of companies are going to the cloud, so things are spun up so easily. So things are so, back when talking back to the biz talk days, when people spun stuff up internally, they were doing internal infrastructure. It took a little more skills to build a server and put it out there compared to now, that if anyone has access to the cloud, or, some cases you see in some organizations, some of the business groups may get a cloud account, they're spinning up infrastructure and stuff. So keeping track of what all you have exposed externally, so you can protect it and so you can assess the security of that. So that's really the primary focus of this article and discussion, because there's other protocols that are risky. And when I wrote this article, it was for an API conference, so really didn't even go into the details about RDP and that sort of thing. But some of the things that also affected is like ICS and SCADA environments. It's kind of interesting because, like, through the company I work for, we've seen customers that they had PLCs exposed to the internet. So a lot of this is about internet exposure. And the thing that's dangerous about APIs is people, since they're not that understood, and a lot of times people think that because they're hard to find, the API, that the bad guys aren't going to find it. But you can fuzz for API endpoints and gain access. I mean, one example was Alyssa Knight was doing some API testing, and she found an API that affected like 30 or 40 different banks from that one API. So just, the risk of what's being exposed out there. And
Phil, I was going to pause you because I think we're headed down, especially talking about SCADA and ICS stuff. I'll even take a step back because I think there's an important part of this journey is, can you tell me your experience? Because I've seen it. Just people don't realize that other departments, not in IT, spin up cloud environments. Have you seen that in your own experience?
Yes, and even just generally back in the day when people were just, before cloud really took off and people were just building servers internally, they would bring in a developer to develop an application because maybe the internal app team couldn't get it up get the application up soon enough. I worked for a mortgage company and they had a lot of access databases. But one of the things with the spinning up infrastructure in the cloud is a lot of times marketing will use microservices to do marketing campaigns, and they don't take them down. Another example of that is I had a friend that has a consulting company, and he was brought into a pen test of a college because what they did is they had a web development course, and all the people that did web development got a website. And so they built their websites, and nobody went and decommissioned those after the fact. So each year they kept adding more and more of these websites, and you kind of figure no one's probably patching it because they don't know about it. It's probably not being secured. It's not, and so forth. So it's just very insecure. And so you see a lot of that. There's a lot of examples where people are, I have a friend that was working in IT for a law firm, and one of the guys that was their manager over their IT department, they had like a cloud account, but for some reason he got a cloud account himself and was spinning up apps and servers and infrastructure. And so yeah, you hear these horror stories all the time. The people doing it don't see the risk because that not trained in the security, and that's a lot of cases with developers too. And that's why we have a lot of insecure apps, because when they go to school, computer science, they're not taking security courses, they're just learning to code. And so putting those vulnerabilities out there.
Would that kind of come down more to like the developer's responsibility to secure that, or would that fall more on like IT and the security team to think, how can we educate people who may be spinning up these cloud environments about the dangers of these external apps?
Sure. Yeah, I think really one of the things people need to be following some kind of change control process, because you shouldn't just put something out there. You should have to get approval first. And usually one of those processes, you've got security has to sign off on it. So it has to have a pen test performed, make sure that it's secure before it's released. So I think that's really the thing we have to look at. But one of the things is getting everyone on board with the process. So once you get everyone to buy in, IT and the development teams buy in on the process, then typically they're better about following that. And so that's really kind of getting everyone on that same process, and then education to make sure that you're getting people in IT and developers some kind of education on security. That way they know better. They're able to avoid some of these pitfalls. Even though you're doing a pen test against an application, if they know how to code securely or understand security, then that's going to make it easier, because we're so overwhelmed as security professionals that we don't always have the time to spend as much time on it. But if we have collaboration among the enterprise, then I think it's going to make it easier.
I think there's a meme about this. It's like, I'm the system admin now, because everyone just spins stuff up. But I've been in environments where you're right. I mean, even they'll do a test server or a marketing project, or finance just decides to do their own thing because they're connecting HR, and they don't really tell anybody. And then they're like, have people come in and do a pen test, even just an asset, just control audit, and no one knows the server even existed, or they've decided to go to the cloud without IT's blessing. That collaboration is interesting and definitely causes a risk there. So I appreciate you discussing that topic. It's pretty amazing, even in 2023, that's still a thing and still a concern. But I think we'll be talking about that forever. But earlier you were going through your topic, and you were talking about, can you tell us about exposure, API connected PLCs, or any type of ICS that you've seen out in the wild?
Yeah, one case was seeing a PLC that we were able to get to, on our platform, that was out there, no passwords, no security on it. It was just open to the internet, so anyone that could find it. And the scary thing about this is someone could find something like that probably on Shodan, fire up Shodan and look through there and looking for PLCs and find something like that. So that's an instance where I've seen that, as well as, some other protocols that are risky to be exposed. I was doing a pen test one time, a black box pen test, where we were taking an attacker perspective. And this is part of the reason too, that the external attack surface management piece is very important, doing reconnaissance, especially OSINT. So during that pen test, I went out and looked up all the network blocks, found IP addresses, domain names, did subdomain enumeration, and I did some OSINT, and I was using Shodan, and I found like an FTP server, which is clear text authentication, exposed to the internet in Indonesia. And so this wasn't any of the IP blocks, and the way it was found was, when you go to log into an FTP server or other servers, it always has that warning, say, only only authorized employees or personnel can access this. So it picked up that banner.
For the record.
What's that?
It said that when you see that display, hackers are like, "Oh, I'm definitely not getting in this." It clearly says I'm not supposed to be in here. So go on. You clicked OK, and
that's funny. But in the hacker world, especially get to the unethical side, it's like hold my beer and let's see see if I can get in there. It's like a challenge. It's like whenever the John McAfee was talking about the Bitcoin wallet or something several years ago that couldn't be hacked. You tell hackers it can't be hacked, you might as well consider it hacked because someone's going to figure it out. You challenge them.
That is the challenge. It's unhackable. Okay.
Yeah.
That's just called time. Now I have a project.
Yep.
Jump on Discord server, whatever that is. Or probably IRC, go back to the old school guys.
Yeah.
Yeah. So again, I just want, in case people, ICS, PLCs, controllers, I just want people to know that those type of devices for people that are new to cybersecurity, that's the stuff that controls, we'll say, your water system in your city, electrical systems. I mean, anything on an infrastructure side, that's one big piece. We have stuff that control chemical plants. We have stuff that controls just different controlling systems, even like a meat processing plant. We found one, speaking of Showdown, which is basically a Saturday night and a whiskey for me. That's called my weekend, just surfing for fun. And we found, we call this screenshot, we call it Turbo Pig, which is, it's the hilarious term ever. And it was an exposed processing for pigs. And this is not hacking. It was just, we were observing this because we didn't enter any access or anything. We're just out there like on the internet. And it was a pig farm, and they were measuring methane gas from the pigs and trying to recycle the gas to heat up the building from it. So we just call that screenshot Turbo Pig. So that is, I mean, you talk about a backbone of ICS and whatever those controllers. I mean, that's like kind of the world right now. And the fact that, it was exposed like that and good find on that. It's, again, we are so far behind in that. And it's only going to take, I would say, for us to even really have our hands around that world. I'm still thinking like 8 years out. I know Dragos is huge and they do a lot of that stuff, but I mean, there's a lot of the companies that are just now figuring out, hey, we've never done a pen test. We're talking stuff that should have been, I mean, pen tests got pretty heavy, and you can correct me on this. I'm thinking like 6 or 7 years. I feel like that nomenclature started to really click in the world, and people are still to this day, it's probably you've seen, Philip, they're just now having their first pen test. And we're talking about stuff, ICS, we're talking about, API. That stuff is way down the road, and it's pretty wild. So if you want to be in cybersecurity, it's definitely job security for at least another 10 years. So just wanted to bring that up. But yeah, and Showdown's is well played, and good job on that.
And to kind of add to that too, for listeners that are just getting into cybersecurity, a lot of the things that Donovan was talking about there is what we refer to as the nation's critical infrastructure. So if you ever hear them talk about critical infrastructure, they're talking about the water treatment facilities, energy generating facilities, even airports and flight control towers. These things can affect that. So that's why these are so critical, and you see CISA is so heavily involved in this.
Now, as someone with not as technical a background as either of you guys,
Whatever,
the
Teddy.
one thing in my head that I'm kind of thinking about is, you mentioned earlier, you have to know what external APIs there are in an environment, but you also have to know what you have. So like that asset inventory aspect of it. To me, I'm kind of thinking it's like a chicken and egg situation. Like what comes first? What is arguably the one that you should focus on? Do you focus on both at the same time? For those organizations who are realizing we maybe need to get this under control, what would you recommend?
Sure. One of the things you need to do is discover all those API endpoints, and I go beyond that, just any exposures of any protocols out there, because that's important that you do, and not just the APIs. The focus of this article is because it was an API article, but you need to be aware of those other exposed protocols. But doing things like discovery, doing pen tests and vulnerability scans don't always cover this. And one of the things that's kind of happened with pen tests, and I think it's been brought about from compliance pen testing, is you've got 1,000 IP addresses. You test that 1,000 IP addresses. Back when people were doing more full scope pen tests and doing everything pen testing related, they were doing a better job of OSINT. So they didn't just take those 1,000 IP addresses and vuln scan them and try to, perform a penetration test against those. They were actually going out looking for the different network blocks. Just as I mentioned, finding the FTP server, clear text authentication that was exposed to the internet, finding things like that, things like this PLC. So running like some discovery scanning using OSINT, Jason Haddock's, I mentioned this article, has a really good article on it was the bug bounty methodology. But the interesting thing was that topic, or the talk got so long, it was just pretty much limited to reconnaissance. So that was a good hour, could be 2 hours to discover or to discuss reconnaissance, discovering all those different exposed pieces out there. And one of the things that got me interested in kind of the OSINT piece and seeing where it's valuable is from people in the bug bounty community, because you have some bug hunters that they've got more time than we do on a pen test. They got unlimited time usually to look for those bugs. Whereas, if you're a consultant, you may have 40 hours to do a pen test. If you're an internal resource, you may have weeks. If you're a bug bounty hunter, you could have months to look. So people who are highly successful like Jason, he would really focus on the OSINT part. So he was doing his discovery scanning using different tools like Shodan. Amass is another popular tool by Jeff Foley in the OWASP project that is kind of an open source attack surface management tool that goes out there and does scanning against the environment, finding subdomains and different resources. So you really need to do that discovery internally. That's easy to do because there was the one product by HD Moore that they changed the name of it recently. It was I forget, but it's does internal discovery, but external is a little more critical since we've got exposed resources out there. So there's different solutions that are external attack surface management solutions that run in the cloud that go out and detect all these endpoints, and it's scheduled where they constantly update those endpoints, the different resources. They're constantly testing for those. So you want to be constantly testing for those. You can do it manually too, but manually can be a little more difficult. So you may want to try to script things. If you're going to do this manually, use some different scripting to automate, because it's really hard to scale this type of procedure. And we spoke with a company that was doing a lot of this manually, and they said when they were going out doing OSINT against the target, that they could spend 8 hours just working on one target. So you have to have some way to automate. And if you're have skills in AI and machine learning, some of these solutions that do external attack surface management does that. And that gets back to the automation piece. A lot of these bug hunters will automate what they're doing because there's just not enough time to do this manually. So automating is a good way of doing that. And so once you discover these devices, then you need to perform, vulnerability scanning against that, or a penetration test to see if you can detect any vulnerabilities in those objects. And one of the things you want to do, the discovery piece would be the first step, but you definitely want to do a pen test shortly after. So you'd kind of mention which comes first. You want to detect it, but shortly after you want to assess those targets.
Yeah, and I would like to actually echo something that I may have torn out of that discussion there, which I thought was super important, and maybe I hadn't thought about it, would be like some, I'll call it active OSINT, something, pen testing. Sometimes they're like, well, that's that port, whatever, we'll go back to RDP generically. That's impossible. Those are totally blocked in the firewall. And, there was a company that we're doing consulting for, and I said, hey, you guys are getting banged by a brute force RDP into your Exchange box. And they declared that it was impossible and unbelievable. We have Palos. That's a rule set. We've had it for years. And I was like, I don't know, man. Listen, I know these logs are probably lying to you, but this is the traffic I'm seeing. I'm not just making this up. So what they weren't doing is in that advocacy for that constant, we'll say active OSINT threat on a company. And they said, oh crap, you're right. Like, we had a ticket with Palo, and they had to remote in our environment to help on an internal firewall that's behind inside our network on a segmented network, which is even worse. So they left it open and they didn't close it, which is kind of ironic. They did do the change control to open it, but they didn't do the change control follow-up to close it. So, I mean, again, as you know, just running on just some OSINT tools, vulnerabilities pop up, not because they're just, some have always been there, but it's because something changed in the firewall. There's a routing problem. Oh my goodness, someone spun up something in the cloud or the DMZ and they didn't let anyone know. Or a test group says, hey, we need to do this because before we push it to production, we're going to spin it up over here, but sometimes has customer data in it. And I think having that active scan, I mean, that would save a lot of people a lot of stress. And even having the pen test come in, what can you see first? Now what can you attack?
And it's also the frequency you do that in, because before, I spent the first 5 years of my career, as a consultant doing pen testing, and we test this one company. And this is one of the reasons I really like to tell people, you need to make sure you're remediating all your findings, regardless of criticality, because fortunately this company had a 90-day retest. So I performed the pen test, and then 90 days later went back to do the retest. They had knocked out all the criticals and highs and the mediums, and it was a low level vulnerability that someone between that 90 days, security researcher, I forget exactly where it came from, but someone figured out how to exploit that vulnerability. So if they would have waited a year before the next pen test, that's lots of opportunity for the bad guys to try to get in, because they're constantly,
I'll say,
threat
Phillip,
actors
hold
are
on one
constantly.
second. So you're telling me they got rid of all the red on a document, and that wasn't good enough?
Yeah.
All the red was gone.
That wasn't good enough.
Even the orange, man. I tell people all the time, it's like, just because the color is different doesn't mean it's not important.
Yeah.
So when you hand it to a manager, they're like, how do I make all this red go away? And that is, of course, a top priority because it's a known. But I'll add to it. We had a pen test. It was a low, like you just said. And I think it was probably maybe 6 months later, there was an exploit drop for that server. Boom, that got popped ransomware. And I just want to make fun of the red, because the red is bad.
Sure.
So,
but to add to that, there's some, Linux kernel vulnerabilities that have been out there for 20 years before someone discovered it. So you just can't assume it's safe. So the frequency, you need to make sure you're frequently testing your environments. I mean, that's where some of the things I see out there, like the continuous pen testing or external attack surface management on top of your regularly scheduled pen test, you need something, because those times in between, the threat actors don't stop. They're continue to monitor and try to find ways in.
So I would like to kind of just, as we get down the road here, is there anything that from the doc, your write-up that you did, that we kind of missed about APIs, or anything that we can discuss to the public to educate them any further on that you'd like to share?
Sure. Some of the educational resources. So Corey Ball's book, Hacking APIs, is a great resource. He also has a free API pen testing course out there. He released it around the time of Black Hat, originally on YouTube, but there's some API security or API university out there that offers the course completely free. Those are some good resources. And then Alyssa Knight has some good resources on API pen testing. And also Katie Paxton Fear, that I mentioned in the article. She's a really good educator when it comes to the bug bounty community. She helps a lot of people get started, and she's got some really good information on API pen testing and pen testing in general.
Yeah, I definitely like that. I feel like when there's something new in the community, and that's a part, I think, why, again, talking to people wanting to get in, I would say I was back in the 2600 days, which I was still pretty young. It was a little, like, I think, confrontational, and then some of those 2600 they kind of burned out. But I feel like when the community kind of came back, everyone's hyper advocate. I feel like the most people that, whatever quote, use air quotes, are successful, I think they're just givers. They don't like people to be taken advantage of by technology. That's not why it's here. It is cool that we can learn how vulnerabilities happen. I feel like we are like the kids back in the 50s that used to take apart a clock and put it back together. Just want to know how it works. That's all. I'm not here to break anything, but it is interesting on the engineering side and how this person made it. But is there something vulnerable that someone could take advantage of? And I feel like the community, Phillip, like yourself, you're a huge advocate. I see you out there on LinkedIn killing it. Congratulations. And just, you're an advocate, you're a giver of knowledge. And I just want to say that to the community, that if you ever need any advice or anything, I get Phillip would totally answer you. I would. And also big leaders in the community, don't be afraid to reach out. Don't think they're too busy. We all have time to help bring this community up, because it is the future, and it's going to be the future. And I don't want anyone to miss the boat that is passionate about the topic and passionate about helping people and protecting we'll say the world.
Yeah, that's some great advice there. And just the whole networking thing is huge. People I see, former students or people I mentor that are trying to get into security, the ones that get out there and network, volunteer at conferences, go to the different local meetups, they're the ones that excel. I mean, a good example was a few years ago, we had a recent college grad at our DEF CON 2 and 4 meeting, which is the Dallas DEF CON group. And he did a talk on reversing malware or something like that. And there was someone, a hiring manager from Citi on one of the IR teams, saw his talk, asked for his resume, got hired. So making those connections, you're going to get the job easier. The people that really work on networking and connecting is going to have a lot easier time than someone that's just blindly, throwing out applications.
Yeah.
Awesome. Well, Donovan kind of asked this a little bit earlier, but was there anything else about APIs and securing them that you wanted to talk about that maybe we didn't ask you about?
No, I can't think of anything. I think we pretty much covered it all.
Well, then, Donovan, Phillip, thank you both so much for joining me on the episode today. I really appreciated it. For more episodes, everyone can go to secureafpodcast.com. Thank you, guys.
Appreciate it.
Thanks for having me.
Want more Secure AF? Find us on Apple, Spotify, or wherever else you find your podcasts. We publish episodes every other Thursday, and if you're interested in watching the full video of the podcast, you can find that on our YouTube or on secureafpodcast.com.